Hivin and Vibin with Dr. Bibi.
Welcome to Hivin and Vibin with Dr. Bibi. Today we have with us Katherine Gokavi-Whaley. She is the founder of She Leads Coaching and a former CEO or COO. I think she held both the roles, but we will ask her more questions on this. With over 20 plus years of experience leading businesses from startups to global enterprises. That's quite a large field to cover today. Great. She is known for transforming strategy into action and mentoring women to rise with authenticity, courage, and balance. Catherine blends commercial acumen with deep psychological insights, guiding leaders to embrace the inevitable cycles of change and lead like a woman, not an imitation. Ooh, Catherine, you are prompting me to ask you so many kinds of questions which are coming in my head right now. Through her balanced women and balanced leader approach, she helps professionals reframe balance as a strategic edge, empowering them to thrive across career, life, and self while reshaping what effective human-centered leadership looks like. Amazing. Catherine, there are so many questions that are coming in. First and foremost, your journey of 20 years. Shall we begin from the beginning? How did that journey begin?
Oh, thanks for having me, Dr. Bibi. Well, I feel like I was a born leader. I'm the eldest of 4 kids, and I always joke that my first leadership role was unpaid. It started at the age of 5. Negotiating bedtime was my first boardroom. So, I always think of it like that. My siblings are much younger than me, but by my early 20s, I was already a state manager and leading people twice my age. But I wouldn't say, while I've sort of climbed a very traditional ladder, I wouldn't say that the road has been straight. It's been more like mountains with detours. So I grew up in India and then in Perth, and I started my first of my own businesses at 24, and then went on to lead startups, social enterprises, and corporates across multiple industries and sectors. And look, each role taught me something about courage, about failure, and about resilience. I was often the only woman in the room or the boardroom. Plus, I was a woman of colour and I was young, and it was confronting. And I think the most confronting thing for me, being the only woman, was that I was constantly being told I needed to change my style if I wanted to fit in. And eventually, I realised the issue wasn't me or my leadership, it was that I wasn't one of the boys. And I saw firsthand the gap of how women were supported in leadership or actually not supported in leadership. And look, there were lots of moments of self-doubt, as you can imagine. And I think what I learned, and I had to learn early on, is that doubt isn't an enemy, it's data. And once I realized that that self-doubt isn't weakness, it's a signal. It was sort of, and the signal I felt it was telling me was that I was stretching, that I was growing, and that the trick to overcoming it was to harness it rather than letting it paralyze me. And that was a real turning point when I stopped shrinking myself to fit a mold, and I leaned into leading like a woman. And that's when my impact and my confidence multiplied.
Okay, so you have spoken about a lot of things which I will unravel one at a time. The first thing that I would like to ask you is, okay, so I think, Catherine, I forgot to welcome you. So let me welcome you once again. If I did forget to, please forgive me. But yes, I am so enamored with this, with your background and what you have done, that, I'm going running with my emotions. And here I am, forgetting to welcome you. So first, let me welcome you, Catherine. You're welcome to Hivin and Vibin with Dr. Bibi. We are here to hear a lot of wisdom from you and to learn from you. One question that comes to me then is, you said there were quite a lot of mountains but with detours. So let's talk about your detours. What was the first detour that you had to do?
Well, the first detour was I was based in Perth. And so it was an actual practical detour, which was that I was asked to come to Melbourne to set up an office in Melbourne. And it was a 3-month stint. And so I literally packed a suitcase and came to Melbourne. And then 3 months later, they said to me, hey, would you be willing to stay on and run the office? So I literally had to pack up my life and move here and finish my university from here. And I'm still here 32 years later. So what started as a 3-month a 3-month trip became a 32-year way of living, I guess, I would say. The other thing, I think the most significant detour was, as I mentioned, while I had a traditional ladder that I stepped up. You know, I started in operations. I then went into operations manager, then into GM, then into group GM, then into a CCO, a COO role. And so I inevitably thought my next role is CEO. And so in my early 40s, I stepped into my first CEO role. And within a few months, I was like, I don't think this is for me. And I really missed being close to the team, close to the operations. I found the CEO role to be too much just thinking and strategizing and very sort of externally focused. Like, you know, most of my stakeholders were external. And coming from an operations background, I found that really challenging because I love doing the strategy, but I actually really love operationalizing the strategy and working with the team, you know, not just coming up with the great ideas. And so I stepped back into a coup role. And then into a CCO role, and then back into a coup role. And then don't ask me why, but another CEO role came up and I thought, I'll try it again. And I did it again. And again, within a few months, I was like, this is not for me. So both of my CEO roles ended up being one was for 2.5 years, one was for 3.5 years. So I did do it for an extended period. But after that, I realized that I'm a really good coup. And that's where I really love, or chief operations officer. And that's where I love. And myself and a really good CEO make a fantastic team. And so for the last sort of 12 years or so, I have been in COO roles, and I've really loved it and I've thrived, and I've been really glad that I decided that is where I want to be, and I'm not striving for the next role.
Okay, so what I constantly am hearing is the fact that you went back to operations and you chose operations and almost consciously chose operations.
Mm-hmm.
What makes a good COO?
What makes a good COO? I think a good COO, the most important aspect is probably influence in every direction, because you're often the meat in the sandwich, if you like. You need to influence up, you need to influence down, you need to influence across, you need to influence out, and you need to influence in. And so having really strong influencing skills and really strong people skills, but also understanding, you understand the nitty gritty, but you don't get bogged down in it. You use the data of your understanding to help make really strategic decisions. And you also help from the top down to operationalize that strategy. So being able to think of an idea, so to take an idea and to actually then break it down and say, how do we make this possible and maximize the potential of this idea?
Mm. So here I hear you talking about data and operations. We all know that operations needs data and a lot of data analytics. What is that? What is the role of data for you? And how much of a role does data play in your successful, uh, in you successfully fulfilling your role as a CEO?
That's a really interesting question. Over my career, I would say data has every year has become more important. And we are in the age of data now. So data now is much more critical than it was 30 years ago when I first started. And also it's much more at our fingertips, and we have more data than we know what to do with. And we have to, I think also now, data isn't always truth anymore, whereas I think that it was more clear and transparent when it was more limited than what we have now. So you've got to interrogate the data more now for validity than you used to have to. Your question is, how valuable is data now as a COO?
For you.
For me, I think data has a lot of value and is very important to make informed decisions and strategic decisions, but it is not the be all and end all. And I think sometimes data lacks humanity, and if you don't align the humane perspective alongside the data perspective, it's where we're getting into a lot of trouble at many levels, not the least of being leadership.
That was actually my next question, which you jumped into. But before I get into asking you more on how you blend in the humane aspect, let me first ask you, what is your mantra for being a leader?
I'm glad you asked me that, because I think I've built this business off it, right? So there's sort of, my guiding principle is that balance isn't a luxury, it's a leadership edge. The reason I say that is I think for a long time I thought chasing balance was something I did on the weekend. But I learned the hard way that career, family, and self, if they're misaligned, you don't just lose energy, you lose perspective as well. So I'm off the back of that principle, I've shaped my entire journey, because it sort of flipped the script for me. If I can sort of explain a bit more about my journey around why I came to this guiding principle, is that okay?
Yeah, sure. I would have asked you anyways.
Okay, so early in my career, I thought success meant saying yes to everything, pushing harder, proving myself in rooms where I was the only woman at the table. And it nearly broke me. Like I literally, got to the point where my body was breaking down and I just was not being able to perform at my best anymore. And a defining moment for me was when I was a group GM. I was scaling a high growth business, raising 2 young daughters. And I remember one week sitting in a board meeting, making $1 million decisions, and then racing home to make dinner and lunches and help with homework and school projects and run a household and do all the things. And I was exhausted, I was running on fumes, and it hit me, it's just not sustainable. And that's when I started to reframe balance. It wasn't about slowing down, it was about fueling up and focusing on the right things. And I started treating balance as a strategic edge, not as a soft skill. And I can't even explain how everything shifted. It wasn't obviously overnight. It took me some time to work out how to do that. But my energy, my clarity, and the way I led people, and what I started to talk to my team about, completely shifted and changed. And it's a lens now that I really focus on in my coaching, is to help women see that balance, for women in particular, I should say, that balance isn't an indulgence. It's a foundation to sustainable leadership. And without it, you might climb fast, but you burn out just as fast. And if you have the courage and the capacity to truly change the system, we need to do that for the next generation. So that's my mantra. And the shift sort of is partly what has given me the courage over the last 10 years to sort of build this business, where I help women see balance as fuel for impact, not as an indulgence. And it's what I've found has helped me lead authentically, courageously, and sustainably. And that's what I'm trying to pass on to others.
So is this the fundamentals on which you built your program, which is called Balanced Women, Balanced Leader approach?
Yeah, look, it's built fundamentally on that truth that balance isn't a luxury, it's a leadership edge, and it's our sort of our strategic edge. And particularly for women, because we live at that intersection of career, family, and self. And I think what I have experienced is that a lot of women are under this illusion. If you think of it like a Venn diagram, that those three parts of our lives, a lot of women are chasing where each of the circles is an identical size and shape. And actually, that's why we're in the self-doubt, we're in the imposter syndrome, and we are burning out, because it's just not practical or sustainable to think that those circles are going to be the same. They actually expand and contract at the different stages of life that we have. And when one takes over, the others have to shrink. If they don't, and we try and maintain and sustain three all at the same level, it's when we get overwhelmed and burnt out and the self-doubt creeps in. So the Balanced Woman, Balanced Leader program is really about helping women map where they are now, renegotiate those circles, build a rhythm that fuels them for their performance and their well-being. But I want to just reiterate, it's not about slowing down, it's about fueling up. And the results I've found with my clients is that they become leaders and mothers and wives and people in the world that are clearer, braver, more effective, because they're leading from a place of alignment, not depletion.
You also have another program called the Emerging Leaders Program.
Yes. So when I sort of really started to interrogate with this business, what are the gaps in the market? And I definitely, again, as often being the only woman in the room, as I mentioned earlier, that I really saw that there was a gap around supporting women in leadership as they started. Like, people think, oh, you're a really good doer, and so you're going to be a really good leader, and no one actually teaches you how to be a leader. And I found that, the frustration for me was coaching in particular was often reserved only for executives. And I know for myself, my own experience, I didn't get coaching and mentoring till I was an executive. And I had some, really mentors and coaches over the years. But they're two partners from McKinsey's who wrote a book called The Broken Rung. And essentially the premise of the book is the fact that the reason we've seen incremental change from a gender equity perspective at the senior leadership, and we have that glass ceiling, is because the rung is broken further down, that women are not being supported when they first step onto that rung. Because on average, women are stepping into leadership and management in their mid-30s to their mid-40s. It's also that time where that intersection of all the other things that are happening in their lives can be quite intense, and that, by not actually supporting them through programs that will help them navigate that, find the balance, and do it all effectively, we're then having the rung broken, which either means women are leaving the workforce, stepping off the ladder, or definitely not thriving. And so through my business, I'm really focused on making coaching accessible and affordable from the first rung, and not throwing emerging leaders in and hoping that they sink or swim. We need to support them from the start. And what I've found from speaking to people is that often that cohort can get some workshops maybe, but that doesn't help embed or doesn't meet them where they are. So my Emerging Leaders program does have a workshop so that the cohort does meet together once a quarter, but what it actually offers everybody is a one-on-one coaching session every month, so it can meet them where they are, deal with their immediate challenges, I suppose help them develop their strengths further, but more importantly, develop where they are struggling, and will develop them to be the future of leadership, as opposed to learning bad habits, as opposed to following the norm, which we all know isn't working effectively anymore.
So how is the Emerging Leaders program different from the Balanced Women, Balanced Leader approach, or are they merged together?
So the Balanced Woman, Balanced Leader is a program, but it's also my methodology, which covers all of my programs. But the Balanced Leader, Balanced Woman program, I tend to find is probably attracts more senior leaders, women who are really struggling to do all of that balance because they're in high pressure jobs, whereas the Emerging Leader program is usually catching women probably before they've got into that real complexity of life, and then supporting them through that so that hopefully they don't get to the point where they're completely unbalanced. Whereas I find that a lot of women coming into the Balanced Leader, Balanced Woman program are already really unbalanced.
I was going to ask you that, exactly that reflecting this from your career perspective and how you have transformed now into a coach, what are the struggles that you've faced while becoming a coach and now that you are a coach?
So look, I did it, I guess, quite organically. So the way it came about was that about 12 years ago, I got the opportunity to attend a leadership program for women, and it was one of the first programs. It was run by Women in Leadership Australia, and it was really fantastic because it was a very holistic program. So it looked at ikigai, it looked at passion, it looked at impact, it looked at all the things women were juggling, as well as teaching some foundational leadership theory as well, which was fantastic. And I came out of that and I thought that was a really fantastic program, because I like particularly around the holistic nature of it rather than just teaching you a bit of theory, you know. But what I was really disappointed in is that it was quite expensive. And so, you know, only a few women were going to get access to it. So off the back of that, because in my day job, I was doing a lot of coaching and mentoring, and it's something that I've always done, I decided to start doing it as a business on the side and taking a small cohort of women on every year to help give that quality, but at a very reduced price so that they would have access. And it grew from there. And essentially, because I continued for the last 10 years to work full time, I've only ever been able to have impact with a few women each year. So last year was a pivot year for me, if you like. I'm sort of, as I mentioned, I'm, you know, at the top of my ladder, if you like. There was a strategic change in the job I was in, which I wasn't aligned with. So it was a good time for me to exit. I had been there for 3.5 years and really proud of what I delivered. My youngest daughter is about to finish school, and I actually spoke to myself, like I speak to many of my clients, and said, why are you still running at 150%? Are you doing what you love? Are you doing what you're passionate about? What's the impact you want to have? And so I sort of sat with that for sort of from end of 23 for most of 24, and said, actually, what I love and what gets me out of bed practically every day and what has got me out of bed for 30 years is the people. And I love doing this on the side, and actually I would love to do this all the time. And so I decided to, and made, I suppose, the brave step of leaving my corporate job and saying, I'm actually going to do this as a full-time job. So what the biggest challenge has been is learning to sell myself. You know, I've been reflecting on the fact that in a lot of my jobs, like in my last role, you know, obviously business development, especially, I had a lot of enterprise customers, and it was really, really interesting to, I'm great at selling other people's stuff, but it's actually been quite challenging selling myself. Navigating, I guess, the current landscape, which is very different about how you build a brand now, and building that brand. I think, you know, with social media, etc., it's a very different landscape to what it used to be. So I love it because I'm learning a lot. I have a new appreciation for marketing teams that I didn't have when I worked in corporate, now that I'm sort of doing it all for myself. And I think the other thing is that it's being patient. You know, I've had to build out my network quite a bit, because in my in my previous jobs, I was connected with a lot of COOs and CCOs and CEOs, but really in this space, I need to be connected more with heads of people and culture and L&D and OD, and those are the people where this really resonates with. So yeah, I'm sort of learning the skill of building out that network, which is also really good to have a broad network though. So I think it's for me, it's sort of been navigating the landscape around building a brand, being patient, and broadening out that network.
Yeah, true. So what you're sharing is very common with what most of the coaches face.
Yeah.
I remember when I started, it was the same thing of growing my network, creating that kind of network which will feed off each other, trying to generate leads. And then after learning to generate leads, the next thing was to sustain the growth and
Yes.
to maintain the practice moving at that rate, and how fast can you do that. So yes, I can feel what you're going through and what you went through. And with that, one of the questions that come to my mind is, how do you respond? This is a coach to a coach asking a question like, how do you respond to your coaches, your clients who come to get coaching from you, on balancing the data with being a good people leader?
How do I respond to them? It's a really good question. So I think one of the key things that sort of comes naturally to me because of the roles I was in is that I want everything in front of me so that I can make a really informed decision. So for me, one of the most important lessons I learned early that I think made me a really good leader, and something that I speak to all of my clients about, is around learning the skill of responding rather than reacting. And in human nature is to react. So someone asks us a question or someone says, I want to do this, your natural response is to react to it. Whereas I try and encourage people to stop, to pause, to get everything that they need, and then to respond. And it's okay to say to people, hey, I just need a bit of time to, to really investigate this or to understand it better. Or so I think that, to answer your question, and I know that's a bit of a roundabout way, but I think that it comes naturally to go, okay, I want the data, but I then take the data along with what am I trying to deliver and get, what is the result that I want, or that I'm hoping for. And I go, the data's telling me this, but the data's not going to do it on its own, right? I've got to have the people in there as well. And so you naturally start to think about, well, how are the people going to interact with the data to get the result that we need? So partly what I coach people in is around responding rather than reacting, and also getting all of the pieces of the puzzle, if you like, they need, and then starting to put the puzzle together.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that's a pretty, like when I teach people analytics, I think one of the first things that I teach is the same thing, is to understand what the objective or your intention, keep your enough data that you need to, as you said, piecing the puzzle together and
Yeah.
then getting it done with a human approach.
Yes.
Keeping this in mind, now that you're in coaching and with such a diverse experience as a COO, what is the legacy that you are working on and going to leave behind?
So I think my business is very tied up in this mission, right? So I talk a lot about the fact that it's not the glass ceiling we've got to worry about, it's this broken rung. It's the first step into management. And I've, framed my whole mission around fixing the pipeline early through making coaching accessible for emerging leaders, because I want to look ahead and say in 5 or 10 years, I want She Leads to be known as a place where women found their wings. And look, the legacy piece for me is deeply personal. I have 2 daughters who are about to enter the workforce, and I don't want their progress to be as incremental as it has been for my generation. I want them to walk into workplaces where equity is the norm. It's not a fight. And that's why that fixing the broken rung matters, because if we don't, the next generation is going to be still battling the same battles. I want my legacy to ensure that the shift isn't just for my generation. You know, we've seen some incremental shifts, but for women to be staying in the leadership pipeline and thriving as they lead across boardrooms and industries and communities. And I want them to do it without needing permission, without apologizing for bringing their authentic selves and for bringing their courage into their teams and into the boardrooms, which I think is desperately needed. I think we need a new way of leading. The legacy that I want to leave is one that's human, that's adaptive, and that's very future focused.
Fantastic. I would like to take you back to when you started. I know you said that, you know, you had younger siblings and that's how your entire leadership thing started. But then, and you also mentioned about, you know, becoming a coach was more of an organic thing which just started, you know, of itself. But when did the coin drop? What was that incident or that circumstance when the coin dropped that, hey, I'm actually a leader?
I honestly don't believe I had that moment, because like I said, I just think I have been a leader since I was born. And I know it's a cliche, people say that so-and-so was a born leader, but I have definitely had that experience. I think part of it is led from the fact that my siblings are 7, 8, and 9 years younger than me. So, you know, when I was at high school, my brother was only starting primary school. By the time when I got married, my siblings were only in high school. Do you know what I mean? So it's sort of been that dynamic. And I think it's also because I had really strong leadership role modeling from my father, from my grandmother. And I've been fortunate to, I suppose, have demonstrated confidence from an early age. And so, you know, even my first job I ever got, I was promoted 8 weeks after I started the job, you know, into a leadership role. So it's something I feel like has just always been there. So I don't think I had like a specific moment. What I will say is I always thought I was a great leader, but when I look back on my younger self, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe people followed me.
All right, so then I'll definitely ask you this question then, that what were the things you did then as a leader, which now as a leader you would change?
The main one is that I think potentially mainly because when I grew up and when I was a leader, it was very male, very, very male dominated, right? So my earliest struggle was probably around identity. And so I automatically, all the modeling around me was command and control. You know, it was hierarchical. And so I fell into that modeling and I performed it that way. But I would say I performed it that way, but there was empathy and compassion as well. So there was at least that element. So I don't think I was really, really hard-nosed, but I was definitely much more hard-nosed than what I think I should have been and what I feel is actually right for the right mix from a leadership perspective. I think that was number one. And number two was that for years, again, because of that modeling, I had 2 separate Catherines, let's call it. I had the work Catherine and a home Catherine, you know, and the two never met. So I would say for my first 20 years, my home life and my work life never intersected. You know, I left it at the door and I went in. Whereas I think definitely, you know, Brene Brown and, or people talking about vulnerability and bringing your whole self to work is something I have learned as I've matured as a leader, and I wish I had known it when I was younger.
I get that. All right. What do you do? How do you sustain your performance? How do you maintain your peak performance? What do you do? What are your practices?
So for me, I do really try and live a balanced life. I'm very conscious around when one circle expands, what I need to do in the other circle so that I'm not overwhelming myself. For me, look, meditation, contemplation, yoga, those sorts of things as a physical practice. Exercise is a very important part of my life. The other part is that especially now in this role, I have times in my diary that are for thinking, that are for reflecting, that are for reading, so that, I'm ahead of the game. I'm not just regurgitating stuff. I'm trying to be progressive in what I'm sharing with people. I don't over schedule myself anymore, which is a skill I have learned more recently. It's not something I've been good at for my whole life.
Right. So what I hear is that you actually keep conscious time to yourself where you do conscious activities, which is going to help you.
Yes, and I have a bit of I have this little I suppose practice, especially because now I work from home quite a bit more because I've got an office at home. Fortunately, I've got a multi-story house, so my office is downstairs, and I have this practice at the end of my day when I've finished in the office. I close down and I shut off everything. I tidy up my office. I walk upstairs. I light a candle, and as I move up to the next level, that practice, if you like, is okay, my work day has ended. It was like I used to walk home from the office. So I've walked in, and then now it's home and family time, and I go upstairs. And for me, throughout my whole career, I'm a big foodie, and I love to cook. And so for me, through my whole career, I have always cooked at night, and that is for me what helps me switch modes, if you like. That process of cooking and chatting with the kids and then sitting down and having dinner is the change from work to home. And that mentally helps me also leave behind. Now, I'm not going to claim to be perfect. There are days where that's momentary and then work floods back in. But I genuinely try, 80% of the time to leave the office and to move to myself and to my family at that time.
Fantastic. I would like to keep in touch with you just to swap recipes. I too love cooking. I too enjoy cooking and keeping specific time during the day when I am actually sitting down. And so now I have a grown son, so he enters the kitchen too. So sometimes it is, both of us in the kitchen, both of us cooking, both of us going through recipes, etc. But then we don't get time to eat together. So because we have spent all our time, what time allocated into cooking and things like that and prep and everything. And then we don't get time to eat together. And we are like, oh, time's gone. I need to go. That's how it is. Anyway, but that's how life is. One thing that I would like to ask you is how would you like your connections to, our audience to connect with you, our listeners to connect with you?
Look, I'd love them to connect with me. So I've got a website, sheleadscoaching.com.au. I'm on LinkedIn under Katherine Gokavi-Whaley. Also, there's a She Leads LinkedIn and Instagram under She Leads Coaching as well. I sort of share, thought leadership pieces on LinkedIn primarily, and then on Instagram I do some practical tools and free resources to help particularly women in particular reset, recharge, reframe leadership and set themselves up for success and for the future.
Fantastic. Thank you, Catherine, so much. You have shared a lot of your insights and a lot of experiences, which I hope will help our audience and our listeners to, gain some wisdom maybe, and maybe learn from your experiences so that they can use it as a ready tool and, of course, get in touch with you if they need to. Thank you again for being here with me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bibi. I've really enjoyed it. Can I leave your listeners with just my one key takeaway?
Yes, please.
Which is, don't lead the way you were led, lead the way the future needs.
Oh, fantastic. I think I love that. That is absolutely a nugget of wisdom, and I will leave it to you now to take this with you and to mull over it. Thank you again, Catherine, for being with us.
Thank you.